Mount DUKONO has erupted thousands of times over the past 92 years. But what happened on the morning of May 8 felt different, even to people who have lived beneath the volcano their entire lives. At exactly 7:41 local time, the mountain unleashed a massive ash column that exploded nearly 10 kilometers into the sky, turning daylight into a dark grey haze within minutes. Its witnesses described hearing deep booming sounds echo across the region as volcanic ash climbed more than 32,000 feet above the crater. Videos captured from nearby villages showed the eruption rising violently into the atmosphere, while ash drifted north toward populated areas near Tobilo. For many residents, the sight was terrifying not because DUKONO erupted, but because of how fast the eruption escalated. This volcano rarely sleeps. It has remained active almost continuously since 1933, making it one of the most persistently erupting volcanoes on Earth. But even for DUKONO, this plume was unusually massive. What nobody realized in those first moments was that 20 hikers were still somewhere on the mountain while the eruption was unfolding. Within hours, rescue teams would begin searching through ash-covered terrain as panic spread across Indonesia and beyond. Follow the channel, and stay with us for more major volcanic events and dangerous natural changes happening around the world as this situation continues to develop. As the ash cloud continued rising above Mount DUKONO, a far more dangerous reality was beginning to emerge. Rescue officials confirmed that 20 hikers had been on the mountain when the eruption suddenly intensified. Among them were 9 visitors from Singapore and 11 Indonesian hikers who had entered the restricted volcanic area despite ongoing warnings and trail closures. At first, communication with several groups became impossible. Its thick ash quickly swallowed parts of the trail system, while visibility dropped across the upper slopes of the volcano. Survivors later described hearing loud explosive sounds before darkness, and falling debris began covering the mountain. Some hikers attempted to descend immediately while others became separated in the chaos. By the afternoon, the situation had turned into a full-scale emergency operation. Authorities confirmed that 3 hikers had died, several others were injured, and 10 people were still missing as search teams moved carefully through hazardous terrain covered in volcanic ash. What makes this tragedy even more disturbing is that Mount DUKONO had already been under strict volcanic restrictions for weeks before the eruption happened. Within minutes of the eruption, Mount DUKONO became almost impossible to navigate. The massive ash column continued spreading across the sky while thick volcanic particles began falling back onto the mountain slopes like dark snow. Survivors described the air becoming difficult to breathe as visibility rapidly collapsed around them. Some hikers could no longer see the trail only a few feet ahead. Its drone footage and satellite imagery later revealed how enormous the eruption plume had become. The ash cloud stretched high into the atmosphere before drifting north toward nearby communities, forcing local authorities to issue ash rain warnings across parts of North Maluku. In several areas, daylight appeared dim and grey as fine volcanic material covered roads, rooftops, and vegetation. For rescue teams, conditions became extremely dangerous. Every movement near the upper slopes carried the risk of additional eruptions, falling rocks, or sudden changes in wind direction. Yet teams continued searching through unstable terrain as families waited desperately for updates on the missing hikers. And while the eruption shocked much of the world, its Indonesian volcanologists say the warning signs had already been there long before May 8. As more information began to surface, the tragedy surrounding Mount DUKONO became even more disturbing. Indonesian authorities confirmed that the hiking routes leading into the danger zone had officially been closed since April 17. More than 3 weeks before the eruption took place. Long before the massive ash column climbed 10 kilometers into the sky, volcanologists had already detected increasing seismic activity beneath the mountain. The Center for Volcanology and Geological Hazard Mitigation had maintained a 4-kilometer exclusion zone around the Malupang Wairang crater for months. Officials repeatedly warned that DUKONO could intensify without notice, because the volcano produces constant eruptive activity throughout the year. The closure was not a sudden reaction driven by fear. It was part of a formal safety protocol created after previous deadly volcanic disasters in Indonesia. Yet on the morning of May 8, 20 hikers were still inside the restricted area. That single fact completely changed the meaning of the disaster. This was no longer just a sudden volcanic eruption. It became a story about ignored warnings, dangerous decisions, and the growing risks surrounding volcano tourism in some of the world's most active volcanic regions. And according to experts, DUKONO may be dangerous in a way most people still do not fully understand. One of the biggest questions after the Mount DUKONO eruption is simple. Why were hikers still on the mountain after weeks of official warnings and trail closures? According to local authorities, The restricted routes had already been shut down, and the 4-kilometer danger zone around the crater remained active long before the eruption on May 8. But for many experienced hikers and adventure tourists, volcanoes like DUKONO have become symbols of extreme exploration. Some climbers reportedly believed the eruption risk was manageable, because DUKONO erupts frequently and often produces smaller ash plumes without causing major casualties. Others may have underestimated how quickly conditions could change on a volcano that never truly becomes stable. Volcanologists say this mindset is exactly what makes open conduit volcanoes so dangerous. DUKONO does not follow predictable quiet periods like many other volcanoes around the world. A relatively calm morning can transform into a major explosive eruption within minutes. And this is what makes the tragedy even harder to ignore. The danger was not hidden. The warnings were already there. But for those still climbing the mountain, the eruption came faster than anyone could escape. Unlike many volcanoes that go quiet for years before erupting again, Mount DUKONO operates in a completely different way. Volcanologists classify DUKONO as an open conduit volcano, meaning the pathway between the magma deep underground and the surface has remained open for decades. In simple terms, the volcano never fully seals itself. Gas, ash, and pressure continue moving upward almost constantly. This is one of the main reasons DUKONO has been erupting nearly non-stop since 1933. Beneath the volcano, magma generated by tectonic activity rises from deep below the Earth's crust and collects in a shallow underground reservoir. From there, volcanic gases escape continuously through the Malupang Wararong crater. Most of the time, this process creates smaller ash emissions that local residents have learned to live with. But the system is unpredictable. Pressure can suddenly intensify without warning, transforming a normal ash plume into a massive explosive eruption like the one seen on May 8. Scientists say this constant activity is what makes DUKONO different from many famous tourist volcanoes. There is no true safe season and no complete dormant phase. The volcano does not fully reset. It simply continues operating day after day, year after year. And after more than 90 years of continuous eruptions, its experts warn that DUKONO is still capable of producing even larger explosive events in the future. What makes Mount DUKONO truly frightening is not just the fact that it erupts often. It is the unpredictability of how powerful each eruption can become. On some days, the volcano releases only a small ash plume that rises a few hundred meters above the crater. Local communities see it so often that many residents barely react anymore. But on other days, it's the exact same volcano can suddenly send ash 10 kilometers into the atmosphere within minutes. That uncertainty is why Indonesian authorities have kept DUKONO at alert level 3 for such a long time. The warning level does not mean a catastrophic eruption is guaranteed every day. It means the volcano is capable of producing dangerous explosive activity at any moment without giving people enough time to react. For hikers, this creates a deadly illusion of safety. A calm trail in the morning can appear completely normal just hours before conditions become life-threatening. There may be no dramatic countdown, and no visible sign large enough for inexperienced climbers to recognize the danger in time. And according to volcanologists, this unpredictability is exactly why the 4-kilometer exclusion zone existed in the first place. For many people in Indonesia, the tragedy at Mount DUKONO brought back painful memories of another deadly volcanic disaster that happened only a few years earlier. In December 2023, Mount Marapi in West Sumatra suddenly erupted, while dozens of hikers were still near the summit. At the time, the volcano was only classified at alert level 2, one of the lower warning levels, and hiking access remained open. Then everything changed within moments. The eruption sent a massive ash column several kilometers into the sky, trapping hikers across the upper slopes of the volcano. Rescue teams struggled through thick volcanic debris and unstable terrain, while families waited desperately for news. In the days that followed, 23 hikers were confirmed dead. That disaster shocked the country and forced Indonesian authorities to completely reevaluate volcano tourism safety. New procedures were introduced, giving volcanology agencies broader authority to close hiking routes whenever volcanic activity showed signs of increasing risk. Those same procedures were later applied to Mount DUKONO on April 17, 2026. This is what makes the recent eruption so disturbing. The warning system had already learned from a previous tragedy. The restrictions were already in place. Yet people still entered the danger zone, and once again, lives were lost on an active volcano. Thick volcanic ash still covered large sections of the mountain, while smaller emissions from the crater continued rising into the air. Every hour made the situation more difficult for emergency teams searching for the 10 hikers who were still missing. Rescuers moved carefully across unstable volcanic terrain using flashlights and protective equipment, while trying to avoid areas closest to the crater. Visibility remained poor in several locations, and strong winds continued spreading ash across the mountain slopes. Officials warned that another sudden escalation from the volcano could happen at any time. Families of the missing hikers waited anxiously for updates as helicopters, police units, and local rescue teams coordinated search efforts throughout the night. Some survivors had already been brought down injured, exhausted, and covered in ash after hours of trying to escape the eruption zone. But despite the growing danger, rescue teams refused to stop searching, and above them, Mount DUKONO continued releasing ash into the atmosphere, as though the mountain itself had never noticed the tragedy unfolding below. As investigations into the Mount DUKONO disaster continued, one conclusion became increasingly difficult to ignore. The volcanic monitoring system itself may not have failed at all. In fact, Indonesian volcanologists had already identified rising seismic activity weeks before the eruption. The 4-kilometer exclusion zone remained active, the hiking trails had been officially closed, and authorities had repeatedly warned about the possibility of sudden explosive activity. The eruption on May 8 was not completely unexpected within the scientific system monitoring DUKONO. What shocked the world was the scale of the human tragedy that followed. Experts say this is an important distinction. Many volcanic disasters happen because there is little or no warning before an eruption. But DUKONO was different. The danger signs were already visible. Scientists had already responded. Safety procedures had already been implemented after the deadly Marapi disaster in 2023. Yet despite all of that, hikers still entered the restricted zone. For volcanologists, this raises a much larger concern about how people interpret volcanic alert systems. Many assume that anything below the highest warning level means conditions are still manageable. But at volcanoes like DUKONO, unpredictability itself is the danger. The eruption was not the first warning. The warning had already existed for weeks before the mountain exploded into the sky. The tragedy at Mount DUKONO is now raising larger questions about volcano tourism across Indonesia and other active volcanic regions around the world. In recent years, social media has helped turn dangerous mountains into global adventure destinations, attracting hikers searching for dramatic views, rare experiences, and viral footage from places once considered too dangerous to approach. But volcanologists warn that active volcanoes are not predictable tourist attractions. Mountains like DUKONO can appear calm for hours, or even days before conditions suddenly shift without warning. Unlike storms or earthquakes that arrive and pass, an open conduit volcano remains dangerous all the time because the system beneath the surface never fully stops moving. Experts also fear that repeated exposure to smaller eruptions may create a false sense of security among visitors. When people see others climb active volcanoes safely online, the real danger can begin to feel distant or exaggerated. What happened on May 8 is now becoming more than a single eruption story. For many scientists and emergency officials, DUKONO is a reminder that nature does not always give people enough time to escape once the situation changes. Tonight, Mount DUKONO is still erupting. Ash continues rising from the crater, while rescue teams search for those who never made it back down the mountain. For the families waiting for answers, the disaster is not over yet. And for volcanologists watching the activity closely, the most unsettling reality is that DUKONO is almost certain to erupt again. This volcano has remained active for more than 90 years without truly stopping. The system beneath the mountain continues moving every single day, building pressure, releasing gas, and reminding the world that some volcanoes never really sleep. The tragedy on May 8 was not simply about one eruption. It became a warning about how quickly nature can overpower even experienced hikers once conditions suddenly change. And somewhere above the ash-covered slopes of DUKONO, the next eruption may already be building. Thanks for watching and spending time with us today. Follow the channel for more updates on volcanoes, extreme weather, earthquakes, and the natural events changing our world. There is always more happening beneath the surface, and we'll continue bringing you the latest developments as new information arrives.